Time in fiction, elements mechanics. So obviously a very important thing we need to do as fiction writers, so I think it applies also to different genres of writing. A lot of this that you'll see here is compiled from like sort of looking at some of the greats writers out there. And so it walks through some elements, it goes through some mechanics of it. But moreover, just so you know, this is all kind of a lot of almost like theory as well as sort of technique, makes this sense. And it sort of comes from this place, which is to say that fiction is a unique storytelling form because it is a whole psyche experience. It is takes place in sort of collaboration between the writer and the reader, and what John Gardner once called the fictive dream. And because it takes place in this space, the space of the mind, it doesn't need to be concerned with the linear progression of events. Instead, it sort of operates like a dream in a way. The time is controlled by the narrators and subjective to the story itself, and reflective of how we experience time in our own minds, guided by the flow of our thoughts, feelings, memories. I see some of you drifting out right now. So you're already moving forward and backward in time. This sort of creates a time-fluid dream state that allows the reader to transcend into the world of the story and the lives and minds of the characters, and fundamentally sort of make it feel real while being a dream. Isn't that life? So fiction as a temporal experience. Here we go. Let's just sort of write this out. Here's time. Great, time. If you know the arrow of time, there's probably a multiverse. Just don't get into that right now. Then we have the past here. We have the present, right? And then we have the future. Great. And our character is here. Big mind. They're there. They usually have a body. That's in the story kind of writing. So here they are in the present. However, in the mind, you could be here one moment, present, listening to me. You could then be thinking about a sandwich that you had yesterday. Awesome, Reuben sandwich, right? You may be thinking about, I don't know, somebody you just met, and maybe they're the perfect one, and maybe, you'll get married someday and have babies, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. Or you could remember that sandwich is actually in your bag, and then you pull it out and eat the sandwich right then. You know what I'm saying? Finish that up. Right? So in the span of seconds, minutes, you're traveling forward, backward in time. And that's sort of the thing that a lot of fiction writers try to do. Okay, moving forward. Okay, this gets messy. Ooh. So breaking down some elements of this, we have tense, which we all know. Is this happening before, did this happen in the past? Is it past, present, future? It answers when is this happening? Now, before, later. We have time words like when, during, as, since, before, which guide the direction of time. We have syntax itself. The sentence is the most fundamental sort of structural unit of time. We move forward, we move backward, we move sideways. You could literally be like, oh, here's our time, wait a second, when this happened, and then we moved back in time. You may all of a sudden have a clause here that happens, and you could be going into the future. Anyway, it turns and turns and turns as much as you want to turn it. And then the other big way, obviously, is form. That is to say that, fiction writers often use things such as, paragraph breaks to imply a time jump from here to here. Time may have passed. And then usually with the larger gaps, if you have a sort of page break, boom, 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 down to here, boom, 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 boom. This is usually a larger time gap, or it could be a meanwhile, etc. And then in terms of, obviously, there's chapter breaks, which we know of, and it's very popular in terms of moving to different points in time by flipping ahead to the chapter, or going backward in time. Where's that clicker? Here we go. Okay, here's a good example. So this is from 100 Years of Solitude. If you're unfamiliar with the book, which I'm sure most of you have read here, this was basically the big book that made Gabriel Garcia Marquez famous. And what he was experimenting with here was time. It's a huge, sprawling family saga that goes through generations and generations. And this is the opening paragraph that basically starts with, many years later as he faced the firing squad, right? We've got this moment that's going to be the future that's not even going to be the story present. Then he takes this, Colonel Orlando Boneda was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Then he goes on to describe the village at that time. At that time, Wakanda was a village of 20 adobe houses. It's very rural, etc. And by the end of it, we get to this moment where he talks about every year, we're now all in the past, every year during the month of March, the family of ragged gypsies would set up their camps near the village, and with a great uproar of pipes and kettle drums, they would display new inventions. And immediately after this paragraph, it says, in March, the gypsies returned. And we are here. We've gone all the way up here, roaming through some history to eventually what becomes the story present, which is way in the past prior to this moment of Fire and Sweat. It's a great opening. So that's the basics. Then we move into something that we study a lot here, which is summary and scene. Summary is a way that summary and scene are basically the way that time is condensed and expanded in fiction, kind of like an accordion bellows. Summary is condensed time with long spans of time, often taking place in the course of a sentence or paragraph or page. That's a lot of Tolstoy. It's a lot of Chekhov. Scene is relative to real time, however that's perceived, as the character experiences with dialogue exchanges and action beats that mimic the natural pace of time. And the interplay between the two is manipulated by us in service of the story. You may have people that love scenes, and they just write scenes. So they write a big old scene, great, awesome. Then they do some summary to maybe get forward a couple of years, months, days, another big scene. Other people just love summary, tiny little scene, summary, tiny little scene. However you do it is totally up to you in terms of the kind of story that you're trying to tell. So that's scene and summary. The example I have here is from, so this is a beautiful book by Jess Walter. It's called Beautiful Ruins, also kind of a sprawling novel. It takes place in 60 years. It's set in Chicotera and then goes back to Hollywood. And this is a moment where Pascal, who's basically in love with this actress who's arrived on the shores of Chicotera town, he's bringing her up the hill to this spot. And it starts with, she followed Pascal on the easy part, a series of switchbacks up and down the pitched hills. Where they met the sea, the cliffs had been carved by shore break, but here, on top, the terrace was friendlier. So it goes on, they're traveling, there's all summary, until eventually we hit a scene about here, which is, "Come," Pascal said, again, and he lowered himself onto the rocky shelf. After a brief hesitation, Dee followed, and they came to what he wanted to show her, a small concrete dome, the same color as the rocks and boulders around it. Only its uniformity and the three long rectangular machine gun turret windows gave it away as man-made, a machine gun pillbox left over from World War II. Pascal helped her climb up the top of it, the wind dancing in her hair. "Was this from the war?" she asked. So we moved, they basically spent an afternoon here and then arrived at this scene right at the top. So this brings us on to some more complications, which is essentially a point of view and narrative vantage points. So point of view is basically how it defines the relation of the narrator to the character and or the reader. This is third person, second person, first person. Once a point of view is established, there's sort of a perspective on time, which defines the narrative vantage points of the moment of telling and the moment of action. So I'm going to draw this fun little symbol on the board. This is T, it can stand for time. It can also stand for terminus. We got a character here moving toward this point, which is probably their death. And up here, we either have a character who is God and knows everything, right? Knows all of this time. Or we have a character who may be recounting the story of a character who's here, right? And as we go, this is on MA, moment of action, and this is the moment of telling. Basically, this is the narrative present and the story present. And of course, these things can change. But with this perspective, we're sort of allowed to move forward, boom, 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 linearly, or jump backward in the moment of backstory, etc., or even go full chapters into like a full flashback. Actually, we'll talk about that next. There's a better rendering here if you want to take it home and get a tattoo of it. Okay. And then moving ahead so this brings us to sort of backstory and I should have erased that. Backstory and flashback. With perspective established by narrative vantage points, the story can move forward move backward before the story present, or forward in time after the story present. Backstory is basically moving backward in summary, and flashback is moving backward in scene. And foreshadow is relating something that happens in the future as summary, and flash forward is something that's seen. So here we got our T again. Let's have a God narrator. Here's our character right here. The story starts there. One day, blah, 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 blah. He's got a scenario. He's happening here. Oh, when he's thinking about something in the past, he moves back to here. We actually maybe have a full paragraph or chapter of scene here, or maybe we're moving forward and the narrator is telling us, he makes some mistake here that will be consequential for him later. Which brings us, and this is probably one of my favorite books and a great example. You've probably all read this one too, but The Secret History. Secret History is a beautiful book where she splits it into two halves. The first half is leading up to the murder of this college student, and then the second half is the group of kids who killed him, basically trying to cover it up. And it's pretty dense, and she keeps the reader engaged by constantly using foreshadow to remind them that terrible, terrible things are going to be coming ahead. So in that we have this moment where after this scene, basically there's this moment where she's reflecting, of course, the character is. Of course, I can see traces of what went on, to their credit, quite small traces. In retrospect, in the way they would sometimes disappear, very mysteriously, hours later to be vague about their whereabouts, in private jokes aside, in Greek or even Latin, which I was well aware were meant to go over my head. And then skipping to the end of this, we have this. Towards the end of that term, for instance, Bunny had a maddening habit of breaking into courses of The Farmer in the Dell. I found it merely annoying and could not understand the violent agitation to which it provoked the rest of them, not knowing then, as I do now, that it must have chilled them to the bone. So all of this stuff, foreshadow is an incredible way to put pressure on a scene, right? You can if you have a narrator or somebody who's able to tell, and has knowledge of some future event, you can put a lot of pressure on a scene if you use it wisely. Okay, layer time. This is fun because this is what people mostly sort of bring up when sort of mention time and fiction. Like, oh, time and fiction. Well, I got two different storylines going on like this, and I flip between them via chapters. Basically, this takes on many, many forms now. You guys all know braided narratives. It's a big part of TV. Sometimes you're flipping between two different characters in the same sort of time, and they're moving forward. Others, you're flipping to the character's past. So let's just say the narrators. Well, let's just say it's the same narrator, okay? Give them a big thing there. And then you have two characters. The most sort of common one of these things is to jump back and forth either between chapters, but obviously you can do it in the course of a short story with page breaks or however you want to do it, right? The most common sort of form of this is seen in sort of like the biopic. You have somebody who's famous right here, and they're at like this pinnacle moment of their fame, right? And maybe something terrible has just happened to them, etc. And that storyline progresses forward. At the same time, in alternating chapters, you have his progressions lead up to that moment of fame happening here. And it goes boom, 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 boom. And these all sort of move along, usually at some sort of connection point that happens here. And then by that point, in this storyline, we have this huge thing, he has the concert, breaks down, who knows what happens. It's a big deal, and it's exciting. And using this wisely, there's 101 ways that you can kind of layer time, but obviously it has to be done effectively and sort of carefully so that you're not losing the reader, moving back and forth. But you guys have all read magnificent novels that do so. One of those I want to share with you is this. And this is actually a contemporary book by Julie Bunton. And if you're not familiar with her, she used to be the director of Catapult, the teaching series in New York. And she's a marvelous writer. Basically, this has to do with a childhood friend of hers who has passed. And the whole thing starts basically with this sort of like phone call of her in the present. She's in New York. And we start off with a little past 1 PM, almost 20 years after that day in the car, I received a phone call from a ghost. I was walking through a corridor of faceless skyscrapers on Fifth Avenue, congested with men in long wool coats who collectively bristled when I slowed and pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a hangover, a dull knot between my eyes, a flutter in my pulse, right? So that's chapter 1. At chapter 2, we go all the way back in time to the first time that she ever met this childhood friend first, which is the first time that I saw her, Marlena Jornet. Jimmy and I were unloaded a U-Haul. We'd driven it 5 hours from our house near the thumb of Michigan, all the way to the top of the state's ring finger. It was early December and snowing wet, sleety flakes. Marlena weaved through her front yard between the soggy and overturned packing crates, the tin barrels and busted engines, and miscellaneous scraps of metal until she was right beside me, sizing up the boxes in the truck. It really is a pretty marvelous book if you haven't read it yet, and she's an amazing author. Okay, so this is my most fun thing. This gets a little philosophical, I guess. The question is, we have all these mechanics, we have all these elements. The question is, how do we move through time while having it be real, right? And that is to say, how do we do this so we don't break the fictive dream? We know that the past doesn't exist, right? We know that the future is just something we imagine, and we only exist in the present moment. But in the present, we are constantly carrying with us the past towards sort of an imagined future. And our characters are doing the same. They're also adrift in time. They're also, in any moment, both here present in the room as well as moving elsewhere in their mind, going backward, going forward. They're essentially like unstuck in sort of this temporal sort of wonderland. And that gives us a lot of ability to sort of like create really big, bold stories. And fiction sort of can create this temporal space that's sort of in the same way that we travel great distances through thought, emotion, memory. Some object may strike you, and then may, like we heard, and I don't know who's back there, the beach ball evoked a memory that went way back in time for somebody in the room. Or they could be talking to someone and a song comes on the radio and that reminds them of their first love, and they just broken up, and we've all had that moment with probably way too many songs. But yeah, basically the mind of the character narrator is a vehicle for time travel. So obviously you've seen some mechanics of how you can do it in terms of form, but also within the space of a paragraph, in the space of a sentence, you can be traveling forward and backward in time with some gymnastics. And what's interesting about this to me, in terms of what my own phenomenological experience, and who knows if that's shared by everyone here, is that the closer that we get to the mind, right? The more we move away from the body toward the mind, the more elastic and dreamlike time becomes, allowing for movement before and after the story. So something that is played with in a lot of fiction is this idea that the more interior we get, the more we're able to kind of move freely backward and forward in time. This is the example that I have here, which is also from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This book, Love in the Time of Cholera, came out years much, much later from 100 Years of Solitude. And essentially, I think that in 100 Years of Solitude, he was kind of experimenting with this thing, how to really move forward and backward in time in the span of a paragraph. And by the time that he writes this book, he's a master of it. So in this paragraph, basically, he starts with Florento Ariza. He's basically just found out that the love of his life is going to get married to this rich dude, and he's going to go off on this riverboat journey. And he's basically there and not there. He's not very conscious of that curative journey that he took. He would remember it always, as he remembered everything that happened during that period through the rarefied lens of his misfortune. So anyway, it moves through this thing, basically him moving through the motions, half in and out of the present, sort of drifting through, until all of a sudden he's struck by this moment of passion, which on the eve of his departure, he committed with full awareness a final mad act of the heart that might well have cost him his life. At midnight, he put on his Sunday suit and went to stand alone under Firmina balcony to play the love waltz he had composed for her, which was known only to the two of them, and which for 3 years had been the emblem of their frustrated complicity. He played, murmuring the words, his violin bathed in tears, with an inspiration so intense that with the first measures, the dogs on the street, and then the dogs all over the city, began to howl, and then, little by little, they were quieted by the spell of the music, and the waltz ended in a supernatural silence. So this is so beautiful. It also moves from basically a lot of summary here into a scene, right? And then he's embodied here. He's completely embodied here in this moment of playing this love waltz for his this unrequited love of his. So now let's talk about the body a little bit. So the closer that you get to the body, the more time becomes embodied, and the closer to the feelings and sensations of the characters you get in the present. And moving into the body, often in fiction, grounds the reader in the moment of action, sort of creating a sense of embodied time. And embodied time sort of allows the reader to experience time as a physical phenomenon, with action speeding up, or the language speeding up, or slowing down as it's felt. You can, if they're driving in a car and there's a car chase, you can create that through language, right? You can bring them to the present there with language. Same thing if it's a traumatic moment in which time just sort of stands still. And these can also feel very dreamlike. There are places when you're fully present that can also feel very dreamlike. And also sometimes spin you out of the present toward the past and the future. But the closer that you get to the body, the more you are ostensibly grounded in the present. And that sort of brings us toward the end here. Basically, the main thing here is that, anything's possible. I do want to say that, as the novelist Fred Lieberman once said, there are no rules in fiction, there are only principles. But the elasticity of time and its dreamlike fluidity and its sort of kinetic relation to the body makes anything possible in fiction. And it's a certain kind of magic, creating a sense of resonance across time like a bell in a tower, which sort of rings true to the mysterious experience of time in our own lives as humans carrying the past with us toward an unknown future. And then it would be great if we had a narrator who would tell what happened next, but what are you going to do? So that's it. You got any questions?